My name is Shavar Jeffries. Good afternoon, everyone. This is, I believe, at least going to be one of the more important conversations of the festival. Higher education is crosshairs and what this means for our country. My name is Shavar Jeffries. I'm the CEO of the KIP Foundation. KIP is the largest public charter school organization in the United States. We serve almost 125,000 brilliant, beautiful young people across almost 280 schools in 21 states plus the District of Columbia. We serve brilliant, talented young people who are disproportionately in low-income communities and who are amazingly brilliant and who are the future of our nation and of our country. And I wanted to start with a simple truth that, like many of us, I wouldn't be here today without the power of a college education. I'm from the great city of Newark, New Jersey. I grew up in a community of brilliant young people and brilliant adults, but we didn't have the opportunity prior to my coming along to pursue higher education. I received a scholarship to go to college prep high school, and it opened up an entire range of possibilities that have led with me being here in front of you today. And so college today is important as it's ever been. It's one of the unique pathways for economic mobility, even in the midst of its imperfections, even in the midst of the conversation we're going to have today about how we think about how we might make higher education better as we move forward. And so I'm really excited for this conversation that we're about to have. At KIP, we really embody the extent to which the college degree can open pathways, particularly economic pathways, pathways to social mobility for young people. We have about 5,000 graduates who cross the stages of our high school each and every year. A recent independent study commissioned by Mathematica shows that kids who attend KIP for middle school and high school graduate from college at rates that are double the rate of their peers, graduate from college at a rate that, if extrapolated nationwide, will close the college completion gap between low-income communities and middle-class communities throughout the United States. We're really proud of that. And what we're really proud of is the extent to which that college degree has opened economic pathways for our graduates. And so for our 5,000 graduates each year, if we aggregate their additional lifetime earnings by virtue of having a college degree, it's about $1 billion in additional earnings for each of our graduating classes. And so at the best of higher education, the extent to which it can be a driver for economic mobility is something that is critical for our nation. At the same time, we know there's work to be done in higher ed. There's challenges on multiple levels. There's challenges in terms of access. Many higher education institutions pride themselves not on the extent to which their doors are open, but the extent to which their doors are closed. Brag about exclusionary practices, brag about the fact that small numbers of young people are admitted into their institutions. That poses challenges that we ought to think about as a nation. Cost, of course, remains a barrier. And so too many of our colleges are beyond the reach of many of our working class families. That's obviously an issue, and completion rates continue to be a problem. We have too many young people who go to college, don't graduate, have a bunch of debt, and that then saddles them in terms of their capacity to pursue economic security for themselves and for their families. So in that context, we're really excited for this conversation on these issues and many others. There's obviously conversations now about concerns in many quarters about the extent to which there may be some ideological homogeneity in some of our colleges. There's conversations around what does college mean in an AI environment as the labor market undergoes those transformations. So we're really excited to have David Leonhardt, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and editorial director for the opinion page of the New York Times. He has covered economic inequality and educational access for a long time, and so we're really excited for him to kick off what should be a wonderful conversation. David? Thank you.
Thank you, Shavar. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. What a turnout. Word got out that at the end, Michael's going to raffle off 5 acceptances to Amherst College. For anyone here, you can give it to grandchildren, children.
There they are.
I'm so, Shavar, thank you for that lovely introduction that also really queued up our conversation really nicely. Let me briefly introduce this wonderful panel. I'm guessing you all know who they are, but I'll tell you anyways. Margaret Spellings is a former Secretary of Education. She is also a former president of the University of North Carolina System, and she is currently at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Michael Elliott, whom I already referred to, is the president of Amherst College. He's a former dean of arts and sciences at Emory University. And Ted Mitchell is a former undersecretary of education, former president of Occidental College, and he now runs the American Council on Education, which is the leading body for higher education in many different ways. We are going to jump right in. We're going to also make sure we leave a little bit of time for you all to get questions, so I don't monopolize the questions. I am confident that we all agree that higher education is vital to the nation's prosperity. I'm also pretty confident that we're alarmed about some of the things going on, and we're going to get to that. But we're going to start with a little bit of an edgy topic, which is, given that higher education has become less popular with American citizens in the 21st century, given that it seems to be a convenient political bogeyman for many politicians, I have asked each of the three panelists to come here and talk about one thing that they think higher education has messed up in the 21st century and should get about fixing. So, Margaret, by virtue of where we're sitting, you get to.
All right. I've
whack
been
at it
thinking about
first.
this so I can put two things in one sentence
if you
and
wanna
have it count.
Want to take two?
Watch this.
Change the rules.
Yeah, no. I think American higher education, we have failed to really reflect on ourselves, and as the people who say we're preparing folks for the future, we've not prepared ourselves very well for the future. And in so doing, part two, failed to really think about and challenge this legacy business model that really provides an overhang and keeps us from adequately adapting to the future. And I'm sounding like a policy nerd now, but what I mean is tenure and the way that financial aid is structured and pricing and credentialing and on and on.
Okay, excellent.
Period.
Michael.
Rolled up a lot into that question. I was in a panel earlier on trust with Tom Simon and Fareed Zakaria and Jen White, which was terrific. And so many of the things that they said in that panel about trust generally in American society apply to higher education in an even more intense way. And one of the things I think about is that in higher education, especially the sector that I'm part of, we have embraced the privileges of academic freedom without necessarily embracing the responsibilities that come with it. And that includes realizing that our own truth is always partial and self-interested, constantly checking ourselves and asking whether we have all of the right questions at the table. And with that, I think we've eroded the trust that American public has in ourselves as an institutions whose main purpose is to seek the truth and to create students who will seek that while they're on campus and in their lives afterwards.
Excellent. Ted.
Okay, so usually when I do this, I've got a top 20 list. So, David, it's been a real challenge, as you know. So let me take it down a notch in terms of level of abstraction. Higher education has not cared enough about our students to be interested in what happens to them after they leave.
Yeah.
There you go. You got it down to one. Okay, now it's my job to dig into each of those. So, Ted, actually, let's start with that idea because it also connects to a point that Shavar made in the introduction, which is some of the issues around completion. Right. When you were in the Obama administration education department, you all made a really big push to try to hold for-profit colleges accountable. And I remember as I was seeing that and thinking about it, I had two thoughts. That I thought a lot of it was really good and productive, and if anyone disagrees, I want to make sure people jump in with disagreement here. And basically saying for-profit colleges are not getting good outcomes. And there was a part of me that wished, wow, I wished you were applying some of that same accountability to not-for-profit colleges, most colleges, that can have very low graduation rates. Some of it is not their fault, they're not getting enough resources, but some of it I think is their fault. And so when you say you haven't cared and colleges haven't cared enough about what happens to their students afterwards, let's take that apart and let's start first of all with what colleges haven't done enough of while students are there. And maybe you can start with that, and then Michael and Margaret can jump in.
Sure. Margaret and I were exchanging a look because this is one of the things that we've agreed on since the Bush administration is that outcomes matter, and that higher education has had a flirting relationship with outcomes measurement. And it was interesting, we started with for-profit colleges, but our intention from the very beginning was to move the accountability debate into not-for-profit institutions. So we required for the first time that accreditors evaluate the outcome. Accreditors insist that institutions evaluate the outcomes of their students. So this has been rolling for a while, and we will get into the nerdy stuff. But the completion thing is absolutely real, and Tim Knowles from the Carnegie Foundation and I have been saying that it's really job one for American higher education to win back the trust of America. 100% of the students who show up at our doorstep want a degree, right? Sort of why you do this thing. Well, 40% of them leave disappointed. So think about any business. 40% of your customers leave. Not only do they leave, they don't just walk out of the door with a neutral stance. Most of them leave having tried and failed for a variety of reasons. Many of them leave with debt, and they don't have the degree bonus to be able to pay off that debt. And so is it any wonder that there is this underlying sense that higher education doesn't care about me and mine and people like me? So I think that when we accept a student, and Amherst does a terrific job, and by the way, I think Amherst, maybe in the last 10 years, 4 people didn't graduate.
5.
Okay, but
But
so that's the other mistake we make, is that we lump everybody together.
We also have the resources. I mean, let's be clear.
Right.
It's a very resource-intensive enterprise to be able to ensure that students get there.
That's right. And so a focus on student success, which requires in some cases some remediation. We know mental health is an issue. We know financial aid and cost is an issue. And institutions need to pay attention to that for each student as soon as they shake their hand and say, you're a part of our community.
I just want to put a pin in one thing here, because there's been so much discussion of the so-called debt crisis with student debt, and in some ways it is a crisis. But I really think that we misunderstand where the worst part of it is. The problem is not someone graduates from Amherst with $100,000 or $150,000 in debt. First of all, I would guess
doesn't happen.
no one does, right?
Right.
So the problem, and you can talk about that later, that doesn't actually happen. Yes, there are students who graduate with large amounts of debt with a 4-year degree, but when you look at the numbers, that's not the problem. The real problem are the people who graduate with $15,000 in debt and no degree. And I think when you hear people talk about the student debt crisis, it is not the person who went to a fancy school and is working at a barista at Starbucks. It is the person who has some debt that is meaningful and has no degree.
The average defaulted loan is $10,000.
The average defaulted loan is $10,000. Okay, sorry, Michael.
No, I would just say it's a completion crisis, not just a debt crisis. And I would go further. I don't know where you were going with this in terms of outcomes and measurements. It's also about what happens to our graduates after they leave college. And because we've not, in colleges, universities, followed that closely or thought about what metrics we want to use, success is being measured entirely in return on investment in a very economic sense. And I certainly believe that there should be a return on investment in an economic sense that's been studied. Colleges like Amherst pay incredible dividends, even at full tuition, economically. But that's not all we care about. We care about what kind of citizens they are. We care about what kind of contributors to the community they are. We care about whether they're leading a meaningful life and whether they connect that to their college education. And that's something that we can collectively be studying much more carefully.
Margaret,
Okay, I don't want to be snarky here, but I just want to say this man, God bless him, has the advantage of choosing his student body. So
Yes.
you're not in open enrollment. I mean, this is not the same thing. And I also want to say, just for wonkery purposes, that when we say degree, we mean degree or credential, like you would
Not
get
just
at
a four-year
at a community college,
Yes.
something that's valuable in the marketplace and in the world. So number one, that. Number two, what really strikes me about all of this, Ted and I were winking at each other. We've been talking about this for 20 years, and the community has been like, hell no, we won't go. And now it's a weird political time. All the energy in Washington, bipartisan energy, I might add, is about accountability for higher ed, and it's wrapped up in the one big beautiful and all of it. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, K-12 accountability, which there was a lot of energy around back in my day, getting that pipeline, getting those kids prepared to be successful in college is nowhere to be found. So that is part of the deal, and it's going to pay bad dividends for higher education. Anyway,
Can you talk for a minute, Margaret, because you thought so much about accountability when you were in the Bush administration. Can you talk about, help us understand from a kind of framework perspective, what would accountability of for higher education look like? Should we be giving people tests when they come and they leave? Should it be based on earnings? What should we want accountability for higher education to look like in a kind of overall framework?
so, and we, 20 years ago or thereabouts, had a thing called the Commission on the Future of Higher Education, which came to be known as the Spellings Commission. You can look it up. I didn't name it that. But the two things that were offered up then that I think are still tried and true, or not tried, they're still true. One is we asked institutions, each individual institution, to say what it is that you're trying to do at Amherst, not just an economic community college credential type deal, because we talk about higher education like it's one thing. It's thousands of things because it's such a, and one of the great strengths of American higher education, by the way, is that it's so diverse. So we say to all the Michaels of the world, tell us what you're trying to do and what you would suggest as a way to measure against that. And we'll aggregate that together and we'll put all the like kinds together and so forth and have a more coherent kind of group of comparators. And secondly, that we're going to use this as part of the accreditation process. The accreditation process is the process by which universities and colleges get the franchise to access federal financial aid. So it's a go, no go for them, given the fact that we have a lot of financial aid flowing to our institutions. And so that process has to be weaved into who gets a franchise.
And Margaret, let's just put this together because you mentioned that that higher ed has been so resistant to that, to any notion of outcome measurement. So this is the Bush administration, and it took until the last year of the Obama administration to get that part of the Spellings Commission report embedded into accreditation because of the continued opposition of institutions and associations like mine to the very idea of accountability for outcomes.
It does make me wonder if that, where we'd be now if we had stepped forward a little more vigorously then. I don't know.
But I think we're on the way. How many of you recognize the phrase Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Excellent. So let me go with that because I think that what Michael said is really important. That we're looking for a lot of different kinds of outcomes in higher education, all the way up to self-actualization. Part of the problem with higher education is that if you tip the pyramid over and you work on self-actualization without working on a job or a house, then you're sort of not going to get where you need to go. So with all due respect to measuring economic outcomes, I think it's the base of Maslow's hierarchy.
I'm not opposed to measuring economic
No, I know
outcomes.
you're. I know
don't
you're
want
not.
to stop there.
I don't want to stop. I don't want to
So
stop.
what
there.
else, Michael and everyone, what else, if we're not just going to do economic outcomes, what other tools should we use to evaluate and hold accountable higher education?
Well, so Gallup does a great job of asking people regularly, does college education, your college education, have an positive impact on your life? I find that data really meaningful, especially when they go in and ask why. I find it really meaningful to ask, are graduates voting? Are they involved in civic engagement? Do they feel they're productive members of society? Those are all things that are really important, right? We're not just investing in people so that they can be economic agents for their own individual benefit. We do it because we believe that they build better communities and a better society. We don't determine what that looks like, but that's a core tenet of what we do at Amherst College.
I want to say one quick thing. P.S. This is data, is what we're talking about, and I'm putting a little infomercial together on data in the federal government. Only the federal government can aggregate, access, make private this sort of information that can really make sure our taxpayer dollars are being used wisely and well. And there is an assault right now on data at the federal government, at the Department of Labor, at HHS, at the Department of Education, and so my cynical worry is if we don't have information, we don't have a problem, we don't need to resource a problem, there you go.
Why do you think the Trump administration is hostile to data?
See, the affirmation, just the previous sentence, that we don't have a problem, everybody does their own thing, and
Because without data, you can just say everyth's
we're flying blind, yeah.
Could I build on that? So in the
Maybe
absence
we'd
of,
want to.
I'm going to go the other way. In the absence of really great federal longitudinal data, which has been a matter of debate in Congress for 30 years, states have begun collecting really remarkable data. Oddly, for those of us who watch what happens in other parts of Texas, Texas has the very best longitudinal data system in the country.
It's not an accident, Ted.
It's not an accident, Margaret. So the University of Texas can tell you whether a graduate is more or less likely to smoke than somebody who didn't graduate. Able to tell you whether they're more or less likely to be obese, whether they're more or less likely to vote, whether they're more or less likely to join clubs and civic organizations. Now, it's a little overwhelming when you think about all of that data about you being collected and disseminated to people like me. However, it is a way of getting to some of these
it
questions.
speaks to the value of scale, which is why the government should be doing this and not individual. I mean, I have a college where we graduate 475 students every year. I can invest in systems to be able to collect that data, make a lot more sense for the federal government to be able to do that and give us access to the data from our institution and other institutions like us.
Exactly.
Which is what they do or did until recently for admissions.
That's right.
So the government does collect a lot of data on inputs, doesn't collect a lot of data on outcomes.
Just to, before we get to the political and ideological diversity question, which Shavar also teed up, I just want to say, because this is a time about cynicism of higher education, Ted, you mentioned this idea of you can see whether college graduates are more or less likely to smoke. I'm guessing many of you have heard about the deaths of despair research, which is by Ann Case and Angus Deaton, two economists at Princeton University. And what they've done over the years is they have shown these incredibly alarming gaps in almost every measure of public health between people with a four-year college degree and people without a four-year college degree. People without a four-year college degree are much more likely to have almost every bad form of health problem that you can plausibly imagine. People without a four-year college degree are less likely to be satisfied with their lives, they're less likely to have intact families, they're more likely to have chronic pain, all these things. This is an incredible crisis for our country, and we need to address it. It is also, secondarily, a reminder still of how incredibly valuable college educations are, not just economically. That by almost any measure, people who have a four-year college degree are faring better, and that's not all causal, but some of it is causal. There is something about getting a 2- or 4-year college degree that can change your life in a way that isn't just economic. And at this time of cynicism, I think it's worth remembering that when we often talk about inequality, there is a happier side of it, at least in terms of what it says about the incredible value of a college degree. That's how I read the data.
But hasn't that also fed some of the cynicism?
Yeah.
The resentment of college graduates and is in part tied to the gap in outcomes and unequal incomes and health incomes between those who graduate from college.
Absolutely. It's just a reminder that for our society, we need to work on this horrible inequality. For an individual, when you're thinking about yourself or your kids, aspiring to that degree is still incredibly worthwhile.
So when you think about that delta, which I think, and David, you're absolutely right, of course. When you think about the delta, this 40% of some college, no degree, that's 35 million people. And so think about those 35 million people who are living not necessarily lives of despair, but lives that are suboptimal given their dreams of who they wanted to be in the world.
And so we're back to the public good, private good issue. And of course, it's both. You know, I've never met anyone who said, you know, not everyone needs a college degree, but I don't want my kid to have a college degree.
Exactly.
So, you know,
I think that's a really important point. When you hear journalists or think tank people or professors saying college is overrated, ask them whether they're going to send their kids to college.
My kid's going to Princeton. My kid's going to Amherst.
Okay, let's talk about this idea of ideological diversity, because I think it's really important, and I think a lot of higher education doesn't think it's really important. And Michael, maybe I'll put you on the spot, and then I'll invite everyone to think about it. Because you, in your graduation speech, said that part of the purpose of an Amherst education is to have the courage to ask hard questions, the humility to hear uncomfortable answers, the grace to change your mind. That is a lovely series of turns of phrase. It's just wonderful. It's
You've now paid more attention to my speech than the graduates did.
I may have paid more attention to your speech than I did to my own college graduation speech 30 years ago. But I think that, and this may have been part of your point, but you should speak to for yourself. I think that higher education has failed some of those tests. I think if you look around, particularly in elite higher education, the part of it you're in, there are entire departments where there are few, if any, conservatives. There are entire departments where there are a set of conventional wisdom that are expressed as values, but are actually political beliefs. And I think that's really worrisome. I think we saw it has real world effects during the COVID pandemic and other times. And so can you talk a little bit about how you assess this question of, is elite higher education ideologically diverse? And if it's not, does it matter?
Yeah, so I don't like the word ideological in this sense, because most people, when they use that term, they're thinking about partisan politics, right? Do they vote Republican? Do they vote Democrat? One of the things I've said before is I don't think presidents should know how their faculty vote. That's really not the issue. The issue is, do they approach their subjects all through the same, as you said, a conventional wisdom, right? Do they start treating questions that are debatable as though they are settled? And if they start doing that, have they stopped looking for people who will question the assumptions that are guiding the rest of the department? And I think it's fair to say that we've not lived up to that very high standard. I don't think of it as failure or success. I think that's a kind of black or white judgment. It's not a report card. But it is about, are we living up to the best versions of ourselves? Which means making sure that in a department or in a college, that we have people around the table who are conversing about their discipline, about their subjects, through very different lenses. And I think we probably have more of that diversity than most people give us credit for, and less than we should.
What's an example of some areas where too often questions that should be treated as uncertain or contested are instead treated as settled, to use your dichotomy?
I think, the question of how do we think about the role of colonialism in the world, right? It's, we have a whole set of disciplines that have taken up that question, and are they questioning the assumption that that's really the root cause of current inequities, current political situations, or have they already decided that's the thing? Right? Great disciplines constantly question their own assumptions, and we have to make sure that we're doing that.
Ted, Michael just said that he doesn't like ideological because it implies partisan difference. One thing I've noticed, and I'll push you to represent your membership here, is that I've heard that a lot, but then what ends up happening is everyone's a Democrat, and actually a lot of them are Democrats who think Barack Obama is a right-winger. And somehow they say, well, but we can't actually ask about how people vote or what their views are. And my attitude is, well, yeah, but if they all are ending up as Democrats, you've got a problem, and maybe you should be thinking more about ideology. How do you think about that?
So first of all, I think Michael's graduation speech, that should be on every college president's wall. And they should salute it every morning and ask what they're doing to deliver on that. And I'm going to make that part of being an ACE member.
That'll make me popular.
Yeah, that'll make you really popular. So I think whether we call it ideology, whether we call it disciplinary diversity, whether we call it something else, I think it's a real problem. And I think let's rewind and talk about cancel culture, which we've thought a lot about over the last year in terms of students and student-on-student canceling and canceling speakers. Well, the place where cancel culture has had its deepest and worst impact is in the faculty. To your point that everybody turns out to be a Democrat, it's because they're afraid to say anything other than I'm a Democrat. And that's a peacemaking statement, because the span of being a Democrat is pretty broad, so you can say to yourself, yeah, I'm still a Democrat. But what it really means is that people aren't going under the ideological label and talking about whether free markets are really a way to solve the very best, biggest problems that we have. There's probably a consensus in neoliberal economics that that's the case. Is that the case? We are, when Walter and Fried were talking last night, and ask the question, what's an economy for? That's the kind of question you need to be able to ask with somebody who believes in the free market, somebody who thinks that this is about collective good and the dignity of work. And those are the kinds of debates that we're not having because we settle for something that's in the muddy middle. Can I pick up one other thing? Yeah. That I think that Michael said it really well. We have over-indexed on the freedom part of academic freedom and under-indexed on the responsibilities part. And I think that that's the other thing that we've seen. David, you alluded to the fact that departments come up with statements or sets of values. Last spring, we were having departments making foreign policy. And for a department to come out and say, the world should look like this, and then to say, well, we have an open search for a faculty member. We want people with diverse ideas. You know, please come and give us your resume. And under the table, what they're really saying, as long as you believe exactly what we believe about foreign policy, that's not okay.
Okay, I want to stipulate a lot of this because I violently agree with it, but a few things. Capitalists do capitalism, and that's why we're not awash with a bunch of conservative scholars who are up for grabs and ready to work in American higher education. And so back to the business model, how do we engender some of that kind of thinking in a way that isn't the same old tenure track, et cetera? So secondly, what I worry about, and it's a little bit in the aftermath of the conversation that was held, that you went to,
the trust
and whatnot, the trust thing. Yeah, I knew there was a word for that. And it is that Liberty University is this, and Berkeley is that. And so now, not only are we not bringing people together in American higher education, we're making our little boutique points of view places where you can go find what you're seeking in a institution tailored completely for you. And so I worry about that. Last thing, just
no, you please.
Well, I was just going to say a little case study. I lived through the whole Confederate Monument thing and the academic cheating scandals and the transgender bathrooms at UNC. And right after I left came the Nicole Hannah Jones 1619, which I could tell you in one of the colonies was probably not going to be a perfect fit. And so there was just huge fracas. And I think, higher ed folks, kind of unwittingly and unwisely go in, and it really set UNC back. We were in the Chronicle, every day for weeks and weeks and weeks because of it. So let's be smart about how we do this.
Yeah, Michael, you wanted to get in?
I was just going to say, it's hard to do what you want us to do, what I want us to do, and I also think we sometimes don't acknowledge the difficulty of it. Confirmation bias is so powerful.
Right.
Agreement is so comfortable. I mean, listen to the three of us. We're looking for points of agreement here on stage, and we're searching for some disagreement. That's your job. We have all of this apparatus so that we can do so civilly, and we all get to fall back on our jobs afterwards and go surround ourselves with people to do it. Anybody who's led a large organization, thank you, there we go. Some fireworks. I want to get invited back. Everyone who's led a large organization knows the challenge of building a leadership team that has the capacity to disagree with one another in the right way. And so this idea that we are going to build colleges and universities where this disagreement is not just incidental, but fundamental, where we have people who see the world in fundamental different ways. And when I was in college, I took Economics 11, and it rocked my world because it was an entirely different way of understanding the universe than I had ever encountered before. And certainly very different than the way my English professors understood the world. And that was exciting to me. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy for me at 18. I didn't do well in that course. And it wasn't easy, I think, for the faculty to hold it together. And so if we're going to do this, and we have to, we should, it's the price of academic freedom, we need to acknowledge that it's not necessarily going to be easy, especially in a society, to go back to the session earlier, that is driving us into enclaves where we are surrounding ourselves digitally by people who think the same way as we do.
And in our higher ed institutions.
Yeah. Let's end before we open it up with a couple minutes about the Trump administration. So obviously, as as this, I've said the T word, as this discussion suggests, I am sympathetic to some of its critiques of higher education, but I'm not sympathetic to the way they've been going about it. Right, so I think you can, and I'm saying all this to then ask you to add, or Michael maybe disagree, as you were just saying. I think you can simultaneously say that anti-Semitism was a real problem on campuses, that it seemed to be the only form of discrimination that colleges didn't care about, and say that the way the Trump administration has gone after it has been extra legal often. They haven't used the civil rights procedures for going after it. Some of the punishments have nothing to do with the crime. There are threats here that really aren't consistent with the rule of law. And so I find both the underlying problem worrisome, and I find the way they are going about dealing with it extremely worrisome. Is there anything there that I've said that you all disagree with or you want to add to?
Michael says we just want to try to get along with everyone up here. So no, I really agree with that. And the thing that I'm in greatest despair about is this, assault on the research capacity of American higher education that just bears enormous fruit for our economy, for our country, for our future, you name it. And so, again, the disease and the cure are not aligned very well. And so it's a real overcorrection. What do we do about it? Where do we go from here? I think, as you can see, Columbia and Harvard are trying to, find their way through the morass because it's going to be very, very destructive.
So I got up to leave because I'm not allowed to talk about litigation and process, but we've been around for 107 years and we've sued the government 4 times. That's all been since February. Coincidence. Coincidence. It's all a coincidence. And thank you. I'm never going to be able to go home because you're spoiling me. So, and those 4 lawsuits have been all about this research stuff. And so our first effort has been to freeze the cuts. And then importantly, David, to your point, one of the things that's missing nationally in the debate is that we've also offered at every point to negotiate with the administration and with Congress to fix what they think is wrong. So on the anti-Semitism, gosh, the amount of stuff that institutions have done over the last 7 months has really been extraordinary. Has it been enough? I don't know, but let's test it against the procedures and the laws. Are we spending too much money on research? I think almost never is the right answer for that, but the federal government thinks that we should stick to something like 15% to support the basic part of research, the buildings, the electricity. Well, maybe or maybe not, but this afternoon after this meeting, I'm going to be talking with the people who are going to propose to Congress a whole new way of supporting research in America. So what I resent most about the Trump administration is the implication that we're doing bad things, we continue to do bad things, and we don't give a shit about it. And I really think that's wrong. And I think that in our ways, the 3 of us have really been pushing the field to take a harder look at what we haven't done right. But I do think the Trump administration, to David's point, has identified many things that we need to do better at.
I'll just to add on to this, I actually fear that many things the administration is doing are going to make the problems that we've been talking about worse. Rather than better, including problems that the administration, people in the administration care about. And to come back to something you said earlier, and you talk about legacy institutions. I lead a legacy institution.
Yeah, you do.
200 years old, doing many things the same way we've done for 200 years. I think it's mostly working, but you can disagree. That's part of it.
Thanks.
But a defensive industry that is uncertain about its future is not going to become a site of innovation and change. It's going to become more conservative with a small c. And if you care about higher education being able to evolve, to adapt, to experiment, I actually would love to see more different kinds of institutions develop in the United States. I lead a particular kind. I don't think it should be the only kind. What's happening right now has the danger of freezing all of that possibility for change.
Yeah, and I mean, that's fair, but what about the last 10 years prior to January the 20th?
I think there have been a lot of positive things going on in the last 10 years. Institutions in my sector have really leaned into socioeconomic mobility. I should give a shout out, since we're in Aspen, to the Aspen Institute, which convened something called the American Talent Initiative, group of highly selective colleges that pledged to increase the number of low-income students, and that has been collecting data about what our efforts are yielding and have shown some real results. So I think there's things to be proud of in the last 10 years. I think there's things to reflect on and do better on the last 10 years.
There are. I mean, you know, I love you. I think you're doing great things out there. I really do. And I used to say in my secretarial days, you know, Harvard is not part of the problem and they're not part of the solution when it comes to attainment and achievement and economic growth for people. Where is that happening? Community colleges and state public institutions, your public universities. And so,
I would agree with that.
good. I mean, you know, they're in the onesies and twosies business. Great. 5 people didn't graduate. We can, you know their names. Anyway, you get the point.
Yeah, and we should also think about how we fund the sector, because
Exactly.
right now we spend too much money funding the places that already are the strongest and not enough.
Righto.
So, and I know we want to get to questions, but we do love you. And
College presidents will take all the love they can get.
We might have a grandchild that wants to go sometime.
exactly. We do love you, but this idea of what is American higher education? So maybe we can pull the I think part of the problem with this Crosshairs thing is that we're looking at whatever that scope is backwards. So we're looking at the 9 celebrity institutions in America who are irrelevant to the future of democracy in this country, except for the fact that they have a disproportionate impact on places like the Supreme Court. But we'll leave that aside.
And research.
And research.
And research. But I think it's critical to follow this argument that Margaret's made. If you want to see higher education really work, you go to Colorado Mountain College. And by the way, you can do that with a bike today. But you know, places that are basically open access, that bring in people from their community, that send people out into their community with all of these benefits that they get. But you know, the whole Ivy League fits into Berkeley's freshman class.
Exactly.
So let's have a sense of perspective about this as we go forward.
Let's get a couple questions right here in the front. I'll also, since Michael mentioned Aspen's American Talent Initiative, I'll also mention the Aspen Community College Prize.
Yeah.
And for those of you who live in other parts of the country, Google the Aspen Community College Prize. I've been lucky enough to be on the prize jury several times. Find out if there's an institution near you that has been a nominee or a winner of that prize, and then go see what that institution is doing.
On the topic of anti-Semitism, could you speak a little on I've read over $300 million have been given by the Saudis and other Middle Eastern countries to universities in the past, shall we say, 10 years that have brought this issue to the fore.
Ted, is that for you?
Yeah, remind me.
Sure. You know, who knows is the first answer. I think that certainly the Saudis, the Qataris, they have been supporters of higher education in America.
Chinese.
Whether they have done that with a particular aim toward building a culture of anti-Israeli emphasis, I don't know. I do know that those groups, maybe not those governments, did underwrite a lot of the protests that happened last spring. I think that's been proven, and so I think that this issue of outside influence on internal university affairs is an important one, and I think it connects back to the ideological or whatever we want to call diversity side. Is that there are plenty of opportunities for people with resources to bend, not break, but bend the focus of a faculty search, of a department search, of student organizations. And I think that we have probably been less attentive to the tentacles of that money than we ought to be. So I think it's one of the things we learned last spring, and we need to be much more.
I do feel I need to respond and say, on my campus, which is the only campus I really know, and I know the other small colleges around me because we were training, we had student protesters. They were not funded by anybody from the outside. They didn't have any money, as far as I could tell. They made some signs. They didn't even camp. I think the weather was too cold. And by the way, the protests, for most part, were respectful of other students.
Yep.
And that was true on most college campuses last year. There were a handful of campuses where that was not true, and that was covered as it should have been. But on most campuses, students responded out of a sense of sympathy for what they saw going on, and there are lots of reasons for that. And I certainly agree with your point earlier that we have not been thinking enough about anti-Semitism in the 10 to 20 years beforehand. I completely agree with that as a former colleague of Deborah Lipstadt. But the idea that all of the protests were funded by outside people is...
No, I would never go. So thank you for the correction. I'll add one other thing, is that I think that a lot of the unrest of last spring owes not to external factors, but to something else that we haven't talked a lot about. There are 9 third rails in higher ed policy. So another third rail is DEI. And 4 years ago, we believed that anti-Semitism was growing on our campuses, and we convened a conference in New York. It was really well attended by a number of 25 college presidents. We did the same thing a year ago, 85 college presidents. But the most striking part of that conversation was a conversation with Jewish students from different institutions around the country, who, to a person, said, "We are not allowed in to the DEI conversations. We are not seen as being discriminated against in any way." And so, we have a lot to talk about, but the institution isn't listening to us. And I just hurt my heart, still hurts my heart. And last spring it was like, well, you get what you pay for, and this is coming from there.
Just quickly, to her policy point about the money and where the money is coming from, I mean, and to the Trump administration's credit, they're focusing on resources from the Chinese government, lots of it, in our leading flagship institutions. And what's up with that?
Yeah.
Just wonder.
What about back here? I want to make sure we're getting all parts of the room. Okay, we'll come here. Yeah, wait for a mic if you can.
And then you guys in the back who are waving.
Were there questions I missed?
David's still moderating.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
If there's a question back there, that's what I was trying to go. And then we'll come here next, I promise.
Hi, my name is Priscilla, and I'm a school counselor. And I wanted to know if you had any tips for school counselors as we navigate the challenges and changes with Pell Grant, subsidized loans, work study, them getting rid of TRIO programs, Future Scholars, and all the different programs that you can give us tips for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, God bless you. We are working a lot on that every day, more Ted and myself in our current iteration, and they're very much live issues in the One Big Beautiful Bill, so we're really keeping an eye on it. Late breaking news is that the Senate parliamentarian has stripped out a lot of the changes. Now, whether that will come back again or whatever, the TRIO program and those sorts of things, we're spending a lot of time on the Hill trying to save those investments. And, the Congress is going to have the last word on this stuff. And they're, believe it or not, beginning to be a little more emboldened on it because it has real consequences for students, as you know well. But pay attention. It's changing.
Yeah, and pay attention, because it really does change hourly. I mean, Margaret and I were comparing notes about what happened this morning.
Yeah.
So it really is a moving target. But on Pell, I think the one thing to watch out for is whether the limitation on enrollment is 15 units or 12. Because that's the big one. So for students who can only take 12 units,
Right.
if they're not eligible for Pell, that's going to be a really big hit for community colleges. It's going to be a really big hit for part-time students elsewhere. And oddly, it's going to be a big hit for D1 athletes. But
Yeah. Amen, sister.
Call your congressional representation. Tell them you're trying to advise students who want to go to college and they're uncertain and they're afraid, and explain the human cost of this.
American Council on Education has a whole page for things that you can send directly to Congress with a push of a button.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Abby Fallick. I'm building something called the Flight School, which we provocatively call an education higher than higher ed. And I have found this conversation much more comfortable than I had anticipated. I am concerned that we could hit the targets but miss the broader point. And the broader point being the broader context that the future of school cannot look like school. The robot in my pocket can pass all the entrance and all the exams. Confidence in higher education is falling precipitously from 90% to 50% among high school students today. 3% of students, this is a recent Pell Gallup poll, say that college was a transformative experience for them. So when I think about the role that the credential has played in the past, and then the recent grad gap, there's a terrific Atlantic piece showing that recent college grads are less employed than they've ever been. We are not equipping young people with the skills they need most. So the final point here is to Ted's point about Maslow's hierarchy. I'm going to say something provocative. I actually believe that we need to start thinking about what happens if we put self-actualization at the bottom. Because unless we know who we are as humans and what we're here for, it is unclear to me what the purpose of an education becomes. I would love to hear from all of you about what you're seeing as bright spots in this space.
Let's do it quickly and get to one more question. Who wants?
I would say there's a lot of bright spots, but I will say that right now, the pressures from the administration are sucking all of the energy out of the conversation that you want us to be having. All of the time that it's called the chaos tax. All the time we're spending about trying to understand the financial environment, the grants environment, the new regulatory environment, is time that we should be putting into thinking about questions like the ones you want us to be asking.
Hi, my name is Sharia Kante. I'm a Bezos scholar. I just wanted to ask you what you guys thought about ASU's Michael Crow talking about the new American university model, focusing on enrolling as many people as possible and making that access more accessible, I guess.
It's terrific, and it's a little bit of her flight school. We've got to think differently. We have to make it available 24/7 at prices people can afford. We're coming to you, not the other way around. So, yeah, I commend him, and he's a real leader in the field.
Four largest universities in America: Liberty University, Western Governors University, Arizona State University, and Southern New Hampshire University. They've all done two things differently. One is they've made it 24/7. They have organized the institution around the student rather than the other way around. Rocket science, it works. They each have 120,000 students enrolled. The second is that they have based the degree on competencies, not on seat time.
Yep.
So you show up and you've learned a bunch of stuff in some other venue. We'll check on how well you know it. If it's good, you got the credit, you're good to go. Those are the two things that are going to unlock the institutional form to be able to accommodate many, many more students who have many, many more interests. But the point is to really take advantage of that. You have to know who you are to be able to make those kinds of choices.
And brand is mattering less and less. You all have never heard of some of the 5 that he just reamed off, I bet.
Yeah. I could sit here and talk to you all afternoon about this, but we have big red lights staring in our face.
All right.
Thank you all very much. Thank you all for the good.
Good job.